All right, let's talk about how to interact with AWS beyond just the management console. We're going to dive into programmatic access using tools like the AWS Command Line Interface, CLI, access keys, and software development kits, SDKs, which are essential for automation and scripting. Let's start with, what is programmatic access? Programmatic access refers to the ability to interact with AWS services programmatically using tools like the AWS CLI, SDKs, and access keys. This allows you to automate tasks, manage resources, and integrate AWS services into your applications. Here's why programmatic access is important. Automation. Programmatic access allows you to automate repetitive tasks, such as provisioning resources or deploying applications. Integration. You can integrate AWS services into your applications, enabling features like data storage and machine learning. For example, if you're managing a fleet of EC2 instances, you can use the AWS CLI to automate the process of starting, stopping, and monitoring instances. Now, let's talk about the AWS Command Line Interface, CLI. The AWS CLI is a unified tool that allows you to interact with AWS services from the command line. Here's how the AWS CLI works. Installation. You install the AWS CLI on your local machine or a server. Configuration. You configure the AWS CLI with your credentials, such as access keys, and specify the default region and output format. Commands. You use commands to interact with AWS services. For example, you can use the AWS EC2 describe instances command to list your EC2 instances. For example, if you're managing an S3 bucket, you can use the AWS CLI to upload, download, and manage files without needing to log into the AWS Management Console. Now let's talk about access keys. Access keys are credentials that allow you to make programmatic requests to AWS services. Here's how access keys work. Creation. You create access keys for an IAM user or role. Each access key consists of an access key ID and a secret access key. Configuration. You configure your AWS CLI or SDK with the access key ID and secret access key. Authentication. When you make a request to AWS, the access key is used to authenticate the request. For example, if you're using the AWS CLI, you'll configure it with your access key ID and secret access key to authenticate your requests. Next, let's explore AWS Software Development Kits, SDKs. AWS SDKs are libraries that allow you to interact with AWS services from your applications. Here's how AWS SDKs work. Language support. AWS SDKs are available for multiple programming languages, including Python, Java, JavaScript, and more. Integration. You integrate the SDK into your application, enabling it to interact with AWS services. API calls. You use the SDK to make API calls to AWS services, such as creating an S3 bucket or launching an EC2 instance. For example, if you're building a web application, you can use the AWS SDK for JavaScript to upload files to an S3 bucket directly from the browser. So, whether you're automating deployments with the CLI, building complex applications with SDKs, or securely managing credentials with access keys, programmatic access unlocks the true power of AWS. It transforms cloud management from a manual process to a dynamic, scalable, and efficient operation. And by mastering these tools, you're not just interacting with AWS, you're orchestrating it, building the future of your applications with precision and control. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you in the next video, where we'll be setting up AWS CLI on both macOS and Windows PCs.